Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 164. We are in for such a treat today. We have with us an amazing doctor who has so much to teach us, and we're going to get it all in one episode. I can't believe it. I am so passionate about everything that Dr. Debra Gambrell stands for and teaches. She's helping so many children and so many people come back to health. And man, her alphabet soup behind her name is a mile long. I was saying before we hit record, you're going to have to help me out here. I'm not sure I can pronounce everything that you are certified in. But I found out about you through The Truth About Vaccines, which is actually doing their relaunch right now, and you were amazing in it. And I told my assistant, we have to get her on the show. She's amazing. So, of course, we did. And for those listeners who haven't seen the docuseries The Truth About Vaccines, please go to learntruehealth.com/vaccines and check it out. They just launched it, so you can watch it again for free for a very brief time. Now, I would love for us to start, Dr. Debra, by you sharing with us, first of all, what it is that you do. And then I want to get into your story to understand what motivated you to become this amazing healer and doctor that you are today.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I am a board certified pediatric anesthesiologist, and that was my training. I went through I went to Osteopathic School at Kansas City, and I did a traditional internship residency at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. Then I did a fellowship at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. I stayed there as an attending for a few years, and that's when my first son, Lucas, was born. He was autistic. He became autistic shortly after he was born. And when I sought care for him, I was told what pretty much every mother's told. There's nothing wrong with your child. This is normal. He'll grow out of it. It's not related to anything that's happened. This was going to happen anyway. That was the story I was getting over and over. And I thought, this isn't right. And I went through everything that I could think of what I learned in medical school, and nothing I learned could help him. So that started me on this now 10-year search. He just turned 10 last week, almost 10 years of searching on how to help him. And along that way, I learned biodynamic craniosacral therapy with Jim Jellis. I learned anthroposophic medicine. I'm in the middle of that training. I learned about homeopathy. I learned about natural ways of detoxing the body, all these different ways. And in doing that, about 3 years ago, I had so much success in healing him. He transitioned into a public school and is doing really well. I learned so much in doing that I opened up a second practice where I recover autistic children. I work with children with sensory disorders, asthma, seizures, ADHD, pretty much any of the chronic medical diseases that one of two of our children have. One out of two children today have 1 out of 20 chronic medical diseases. And when you throw in obesity, it's 57% of our children are sick. So that's what my second medical practice is recovering that. I'm also a MAPS practitioner, which used to be the Dan doctors. So I use those types of biomedical interventions.
57% of our children are sick.
Yep.
When did this really start ramping up? Because, the children of back when I was a kid, it didn't seem like this. I don't remember anyone having ADHD. And I even was I was put in some special classes where, you would have thought there would have been, ADHD. I was just around a bunch of kids, and there were some kids that were a little bit hyper, but I don't remember kids having asthma. I don't remember kids having allergies. I don't remember kids having autism when I was growing up. I don't remember oh, there was no there was well, there was one kid in my entire childhood that was obese. So I don't remember these being a problem, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, so historically, what we're looking at is up until the early 20th century, we had diseases of heat. We had plagues, we had tuberculosis, we had diseases where the body became overly heated. Um, infectious diseases uh, were fairly rampant, especially in children. Then with the introduction of the Industrial Revolution, which was leading up to that point, and now we're in our second Industrial Revolution where we're looking at persistent bioaccumulating toxins in the environment, plastics, and all of these new chemicals that we're creating. There's 80,000 chemicals that are patented in the US, 2,000 new chemicals every year, most of which have not been tested for health safety. None, almost none, have been tested together. So we have all of this increasing toxicity in our environment that have changed the normal diseases from diseases of heat to diseases of neurologic origin. So that's what we're looking at. Autism, seizures, ADHD, they're all nervous type diseases, cooling diseases.
Are you saying these diseases are from toxicity?
Yes. So the way I see this is we have to digest everything that's coming into us through our body, through our senses, through our eyes, our ears, our digestion, our stomach, our sense of touch. We have to digest everything that's coming in. And in our environment, there is just more to digest. So, in addition to the physical things to digest, we've also got increased fear, we've got EMF, we've got air quality that's going down. So, we have all of this to digest and bring down to zero. And if we don't digest something, we have what I call residual undigested proteins. And that's a blanket statement for everything that remains undigested, whether it's a food particle or a viral particle or an emotion or EMF or anything. Anything that remains undigested in the body can trigger disease. The body's ability to digest is hijacked. So when we do encounter something that we do need to look at, our immune system does need to look at, our body is so busy trying to digest this other input that's coming in. We have a sensory hijacking. And, that's the current state of children today. Their bodies are more physically dense because they are busy trying to digest all of these undigested proteins in their body that their immune system is just losing its inherent intelligence.
Really interesting. And you brought up like EMF, things like Wi-Fi. An expert, Dr. Igor Smirnov, that I recently had on the show, said that when they studied the mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of the cell, they found that when someone was holding a cell phone up to their head, that the mitochondria of the brain, the brain cells, would go dormant. And so just by for like having a 20-minute phone call, you're dulling the brain cells near the cell phone. And just imagine, for all of us who constantly have a cell phone somewhere on our body, what it's doing to our metabolism. If
Yep.
it's affecting us on a cellular level, on the mitochondria. They're saying a lot of diseases these days can be attributed in some way to the mitochondria malfunctioning. I've heard that several times, and now they're able to link cell phones and think about what other, we're constantly surrounded by Wi-Fi signals, and so our body's having to deal with this energetic disruption, along with, like you said, 80,000 new chemicals. It's hard to even imagine. And even when we inhale, like, we don't think that a chemical, we're like, oh, well, I'm not putting a chemical in my mouth. But if you're inhaling through your nose, you still are swallowing it, because the way the nose works, it filters it out, and then the back of the nose will swallow whatever going on. And so anything that you're inhaling also gets into your digestion as well. Isn't that right?
That's right. In anthroposophic medicine, we talk about the 12 physical senses. So we have our five senses. that we typically talk about: hearing, taste, touch, smell. Um, but we also have a sense of balance. And so if we have a child, for instance, that does have, say, an increase in mercury in their body, we know that mercury affects the myelin propagation. So as the child is growing, their myelin should be extending out to the tips of their fingers and toes. They should be able to have a set point of where they are in space. Now, if they have mercury in their body, that propagation gets interrupted and the child can no longer have a balanced set point. So you see children rocking in their chairs in the classroom. They can't sit still. They're in constant movement because they are trying to reset what is supposed to be accessible in stillness. They have to add something to digest that inappropriate response. And so, it's exactly like you're saying, there's this other sense input, this sense of balance, and then there are 12 total physical senses that are coming into the body. Their sense of movement, sense of balance, sense of the word, so that somebody else is speaking a word to you. We know autistic children are not able to point. They're not able to look at something because that requires them knowing who they are and what's outside of them, the self versus non-self. That line gets blurred. So they can't of themselves take their finger and point out of themselves as something else because that sense is disrupted.
Wow. And what kind of progress do you see in your clinic with those children who have developed these symptoms of autism? I have seen so many people be diagnosed on or so many children be diagnosed on the autistic spectrum, and then through detox and through natural medicine, all of a sudden no longer be on the autistic spectrum. I've seen it enough times to go, well, you know what? Sometimes just because we have symptoms doesn't mean we are the diagnosis for life. So I don't know if you also have seen that in your practice, but what kind of results do you get? Can you share some examples of success?
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you. We have in society this idea of a glass ceiling that I call the glass ceiling. And we think that we are stuck where we're at. And so, what I talk to all of my patients about is we need to shatter this glass ceiling. Somebody put you in this box. They said your child has autism. That's only a glass ceiling. There are things beyond that we can access. And it's so important to hold the capability of the child in the mind of the parent. And this is vital. So when somebody says, your child, a physical therapist is working with the child, your child can't cross their midline. I tell the parent, your child can't cross the midline yet. And it is so important to keep that vision of what the child can do alive. And I had an instance in my office, um, in the recent past, where the parent came in and we were speaking about her child, and she was told that maybe her child understands what's happening, maybe she doesn't. She definitely has no expressive ability, no words. And I said, your child understands everything that's happening. She understands what's going on in this room. She understands our conversation. She understands. And just then her child walked up to us and said, "Let's go." So holding this image of what the child can do is so important. That's kind of a bigger concept. But then on the smaller concepts, I've seen, parents walk in with their child, their 4-year-old child who's nonverbal, and just starting them on warming, fat soluble vitamins and cod liver oil. Just that, vitamins A, D, E, and K, and cod liver oil, and the child's speaking in 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
So, it's just this idea of how can we warm up the toxins that are in this child and get them moving. And also, I've worked in a facility where they do no biomedical intervention, no chelation, no gluten restriction, no diet change, nothing. All they do is they have the child live into an image that they create. So if the child is um, maybe having a disagreement with another child in the class, they call the child over, both children, and they say, how can you share that toy? And the children themselves come up with an idea or a way to handle that situation. Or um, what does it look like for you to be ready to have snack? And the child lives into that image. It doesn't matter if they're autistic or they've got Downs or they have chronic seizures. They are all rising up and living into these images.
That
And
is incredibly
it's
powerful.
incredible. And this work is out of Rudolf Steiner's curative education. And Robin Brown is the woman who runs Mulberry in Santa Rosa. And that's what she uses. She uses no biomedical, no chelation, nothing. It's only presenting an image to a child that they can rise up and live into. And I've seen results there that are incredible. And the thing is that when you get the child's will involved,
Hmm.
so let me back up. In anthroposophic medicine, there is an idea of as a child grows, consciousness comes into the body. And the analogy I give to this is as a pediatric anesthesiologist, I give a toxin, consciousness leaves, right? It's pretty obvious. You give a toxin, you become unconscious. You stop giving the toxin, the anesthetic, the consciousness comes back. It's something that most people can hold on to, even if they don't believe in anything but the physical. The same thing happens in a child. Over 18 years, you have consciousness coming into the body. And the more toxins the child is exposed to, the less consciousness can come into the body. So we're talking about awareness of the body, mental processing, all of these ideas of consciousness. So when we're thinking about bringing consciousness into the body of a child in the situation where we're not using anything else other than the image that they're presented, that child uses their own will forces. And in that gesture of them doing it for themselves, not the mom tying their shoe, but the mom saying, what does it look like to cross the laces over each other? How do you pass that through? So as the child is doing all of these physical movements of their own will, consciousness comes into the body, regardless of the toxins that are in there. Now, it might not look like something dramatic, but the child's doing something that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And over time, those individual physical things that they're doing grow. So now they are tying their shoe. We have children that parents never thought they would have been able to read or write or do math or be in a play or knit or any of these things. And they're doing these things. You just start out slow and you do what they can do. It's incredible.
That is absolutely incredible. The mind and the body are so much more miraculous than we ever give it credit for. And I love that this program pulls forth. It's like using the carrot instead of the stick. It pulls forth and
Yes.
allows the child to come out of that box they've been living in. Um I absolutely I just it's so amazing. One thing I learned early on from a pediatric occupational therapist I took my son to when he was born to get craniosacral. And by the way, craniosacral in infants, within an hour of my son being born, he was getting craniosacral. It was incredible. And of course, chiropractic medicine and pediatric chiropractic medicine. We just came from the chiropractor today. And my son, there's a little hitch in his step, and he gets his adjustment, and then he's off running faster than I can run. It's just
Yep.
amazing. But every time he had either a craniosacral session or a chiropractic session, we saw huge leaps in his development. And with the osteopathic pediatrician said, sorry, with the occupational pediatrician said, she said, we hear no, and I can't remember the name. It was like something like we hear no 2,000 times a day. It was like some crazy number, and then we hear a yes, like only 10% of the time, as a kid. And so kids grow up hearing no, 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 and they only hear yes once in a while. And she said, like, look at what this does. It creates this opposition, creates this conflict, and also really suppresses the child. Instead, figure out how to say say no by saying yes. So when she said that, I was like, okay, this sounds really weird. Like, how am I going to say no by saying yes? She's like, how about this? Yes, you can have that cookie after dinner. I'm really excited to give you that cookie after dinner. Or, yes, we can go to the park after nap time. And so you're not saying no, but you're saying yes when you can, and you're creating that regulation. And so we've been practicing that with my son, and it's amazing how much his spirit shifts
Mhm.
when we say it, or like correcting him. I've noticed that instead of saying like, he'll say that's a, for example, that's a red car when it was a blue car, or maybe it's a red car but it was really an orange car. I'll say, I can see why you thought that was a red car. I think that color's more orange. What do you think? So I have this dialogue with him, and he's like 2.5. But what I noticed is that instead of just saying no, that's not red, I'm not like slamming him down. And just saying no, you're wrong. I'm like acknowledging his attempt instead of suppressing him, and then showing him what the right answer was. Is this in alignment with what you do, and can you teach us a bit more of this style of thinking and how we interact with kids to help them be the best version of themselves?
Yeah, so that's a really good example. You know, a way that people can understand that, a lot of people are into the cellular detox. Everyone's talking about how do we detox the cell? And we know that um, there are different functions of the cell of our life processes, and they can be divided into seven different life processes, and they're associated with the seven chakras and the seven planets, and all this magical number of seven. But what we're looking at is, how do cells reproduce? How do they grow? How do they breathe? How do they circulate? All these basic seven processes. And a really important process is the process of boundary creation. And we know that in a cell, the boundary is not a brick wall. It's a semi-permeable membrane. It allows certain things in and allows certain things out. And you can imagine that if a parent tells their child, no, that car is red, you can feel in your stomach how life stops. You can
Mm,
feel being told no in your body,
mhm.
what that does. And so the idea of being able to interact with your child to provide a solid boundary, especially in these children that have these undigested proteins that are circulating, their sense of self and non-self is distorted. They don't have a really good semi-permeable membrane, you know? So being the parent that can provide that loving, consistent, warm boundary for them, like you did, like the example that you gave, you can have your cookie, yes, after dinner. So you're providing structure and form just like a healthy cell is doing. Um, I think that's an image that a lot of science minded people can identify with. And then anybody who works with the body can feel it in their body. When somebody tells you something that doesn't sit right, when they come up against your boundary really hard, you feel it. You feel it in your chest, in your stomach, in your jaw. Your jaw might get tight. You might hold your breath. All of those things, the movement stops. Um, so I think that's a way that maybe parents can experience what their child experiences and then what their cells experience.
Fascinating. So the progress that you've had with your son, can you share a bit more about that? I find it so motivating to know that through your almost 10 years of searching and searching, that you're able to bring Lucas into a place where he's able to flourish.
Yeah. So, initially we started where most parents start once they get out of the regular medical system. We did gluten free, dairy free, the usual stuff, switch to organic foods. When I was in medical school, they said it didn't matter. Organic was a waste of money. That's what they taught us. They said nutrition doesn't matter. Patients aren't going to pay for it and they're not going to follow it. Spending time talking about nutrition is a waste of money, and you're not going to make any money in your offices by doing that. So I really had to unlearn much of what I did in order to heal him, much of what I learned. Um, so I started with the usual stuff, probiotics and enzymes and those types of things, the craniosacral therapies. Um, Probably the biggest advance we had, we live across from a vineyard in Northern California, and we were sleeping with the windows open in September. And my child was going to school and he got kicked out because the assistant came behind him and tried to reach over to point to his paper, and he got startled and his arms went back and he hit her. And there's a no hitting policy, and even though that was obviously an extreme example, he got kicked out. So 2 days later, he came down with a really high fever. Now, when he was sleeping with the windows open, they had sprayed the vineyards, and so his nervous system was especially triggered. So he was kicked out of school. 2 days later, he had this really high fever, the kind of fever where he said, I feel like I'm really high up in the sky. I'm scared. I feel like I'm going to start falling, and over the next few hours, he described this feeling of falling down to the earth. And this was my first experience with using anthroposophic medicine. And to me, this sounds like one of the big fevers that we don't get an opportunity to experience. The diseases we used to have, chickenpox and measles and mumps and rubella and all of these incarnating, these diseases that bring the child into their body so they can have these developmental leaps. It sounded like that's the type of fever it sounded like. So I did some anthroposophic remedies. I kept his belly warm. I did all of the things that you do to bring a fever in and through the body in a way that's healing. Um, we had a 3-week convalescence. He stayed home. I took off work, which is unheard of in this society. I stayed close to him. I kept my warm presence next to him. We did art therapy in the sun. He ended up coming down with scarlet fever. That was the disease that he was experiencing. And we did all of this type of curative, supportive. We didn't suppress the fever with Tylenol. We didn't give antibiotics. Just everything we did was a warming, digesting, moving, increasing flow type of healing. And he went back to school after 3 weeks, and he was on restricted activity for another 2. They had a meeting with several people on the school board, including his teacher and his father, and the child's father. And we were all in the room, and the teacher walked in and she said, the child that came back to my classroom last week is not the child that left. So the way we handled his fever gave him a huge developmental leap. And she showed me his books. In Waldorf School, they have their main lesson books where they're writing and art and math and all of their work is in it. And you could see before and after. It was messy and scribbled and disordered, and the letters were all different sizes. And after he came back after this illness, he was writing in a straight line with neat writing. He had an increased awareness of what he was doing. It was really a huge jump in his healing. And I got to experience firsthand how important how we manage fevers are. That was bigger than anything we had done in the previous years helping him. So, it gave me an appreciation for the importance of warmth in our children's environment. And so I've been working with that concept for the last 3 or 4 years. How do you increase the warmth of your child's environment? You eat meals at the regular time every day, because when you eat at the same time every day within 15 minutes, before you eat, your body already starts making digestive enzymes. If you're eating just whenever throughout the day, your body has no idea food's coming. But if you get those regular rhythms, it's really important. If you get up in the morning every day, we talked about EMF and Wi-Fi. If you experience sunlight, morning sunlight in the day, it sets the point of homeostatic set point for your circadian and mitochondrial rhythms from that point when you wake up. and that extends through the whole day. If your first experience with light is some fluorescent light that comes on or your cell phone, that's the set point that you work from, which is not the same as is coming from the sunlight. So when you're looking at that rhythm throughout the day, you have to warm up that decoy rhythm that you started with down to a natural rhythm, and that takes energy. That takes warmth that you should be using for your own growth and development. So, there's all these ways that we can increase the warmth, eating together, eating happy, dressing in clothes that are made of natural fibers, um, not using air conditioning if we don't have to, tolerating temperature changes, as we need with appropriate layers, getting sunlight, not throwing on sunblock every time we go outside, eating foods that are resonating naturally with our own frequencies. If we eat something loaded with dyes and chemicals, we have to warm all that food up just to bring it back to what it's supposed to be as it exists in nature. So if we can do um, everything we put in our body, if it can be as close to natural as it naturally occurs to start with, we don't have to spend extra money warming it or extra energy warming it.
You've touched on so many important points. Did you see other children have developmental leaps after having a fever, after the parents allowed the child to have a fever?
I did. In fact, that's part of the protocol that I use when I am first evaluating a child for sensory disorder, asthma, any of these things. I have a protocol that I start them on that gets their immune system, that kind of increases the intelligence of the immune system. And quite often, within 10 to 14 days, these children will fever because their body is now a little more intelligent that it can actually see something to focus on. So they have a fever, they experience a fever, and I have a fever protocol. I, in fact, have a fever hotline. It's the number one way my patients have access to me is if their child has a fever, because I think fevers are that important. So we start a child on this protocol. They typically will have a fever. I help the child and the mother work with that fever through the child. And I tell the mother, watch your child, watch for a developmental leap after they recover from this fever. And the mothers and the teachers consistently tell me that there is a noticeable developmental leap. The child's now sitting in their chair. The child is now able to, you know, be interactive and be present, and maybe they're not tapping their pencil on the table anymore. They don't have these, compensatory behaviors as much. They're just more in their body, or they're learning how to ride a bike, or they finally figured out which way B and D go when they're writing it. It's incredible.
Why is that? Why do fevers how do fevers cause this to have a developmental shift? Is it that fevers help the body detoxify? Why does this work?
So, we were talking about that we are not seeing these childhood fevers anymore.
Mhm.
So typically, we had a fever every 1 to 2 years where the fever would move in the body in through the metabolic system and kind of clear whatever has been undigested in the gut. Residual viral proteins or undigested foods or any of these things. We would have these quote unquote, what I call gut reset fevers. We don't have
Wow.
these anymore. So when we have a fever that we are able to help guide and penetrate into the metabolic sphere, because a lot of our children, when they fever today, they talk about headache, belly pain when they have a fever. This was not the case 20, 30 years ago. When I fevered as a child, I didn't experience headaches and belly aches, not like the children today do. And to me, what that says is the fever is not getting into the central core of the body. It's not getting into the metabolic sphere. It's staying peripheral in the sense sphere. That's why we're experiencing pain. And so when we have a fever that we can direct more deeply into the body with warm, heating pads on the belly and warm teas and keeping the legs warm and all these different anthroposophic ideas, and also using homeopathy, when we can get the fever into the core of the body, it acts like the gut reset fever of the previous childhood illnesses that we had. But again, it requires a conscious effort knowing that the children today, their bodies are filled with more chemicals than they were just 20 years ago. We know the
Mm-hmm.
2005 Environmental Working Group study showed there's 287 chemicals in the umbilical cords of newborn babies.
Mm-hmm.
We just know that's what it is. And there's some deeper context to that. When we're talking about our life forces, those 7 processes, um, what in anthroposophic medicine is called the etheric level of the body. There's 4 different levels that we talk about in anthroposophic medicine and in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic. There's a lot of similarities, but we're talking about the physical body. Then the etheric body are those life processes, what we can think of as cellular processes. Then we have the soul body, which in anthroposophic medicine is called the astral body. And then we have the spirit body, which is called the ego body. So we have these 4 bodies. The physical body is more dense than it used to be. The etheric life force body, which is also physiology, right? Our physiologic processes, is also slowed down because of the increased density of the physical body, but also because our ego body, our spirit, is not as deeply integrated into our physical body. And that's because it has a harder time, the spirit has a harder time coming in because the body is more physically dense, and we have traumatic experiences that cause us to go out of our body. Like that's what shock is, right? If somebody experiences, maybe an animal getting hit on the side of the road, and then all of a sudden you can't really have a conversation with that person if they're very deeply affected, they're not quite there anymore. They're in shock. That's what that is. The spirit, the ego, kind of disassociates from the body a little bit, and that happens with any anti-physiology that we're doing, antibiotics, antipyretics, Tylenol and ibuprofen, antacids. When we talk about the war on cancer, the war on drugs, the Cold War, everything that's anti in our body causes a little bit of this, what's called excarnation, the ego, the spirit, the higher intelligence dissociates from the physical body, and there's less regulation. And a really clear example of this is when a newborn is first born, their first few breaths are so irregular, right? Their heart rate's irregular. They can't maintain their temperature. The first thing we do when a baby's born is warm them and dry them because they have poor temperature regulation. Their eyes, if you look at them, their eyes are divergent for the first few seconds to few minutes. They don't come to midline until a little bit of time after they're born. All of these things coming to a set point, especially during the first 28 days of a newborn, is the spirit coming into the body. So we can see that. We see that with anesthesia. If you were in my operating room, you would see as a person goes to sleep, the first thing that leaves is their frontal lobe higher function. They can't look at you in the eye as you give them the medicine. They can no longer connect with you as a human. They might move, they might vocalize something that's not quite clear. The words are not clear. And then as you give them more anesthetic and they go further to sleep, even those processes go away, and you're left with the physical body and a still body that has life processes happening, but those upper higher functions have lifted off. And so it's this same idea of consciousness coming in and coming out. This happens every night when we go to sleep. When we drift off to sleep, our higher self leaves. I mean, you can't talk to somebody who's asleep in a bed. They're not there for all intents and purposes. They're there, but their consciousness isn't there. And then you wake up in the morning and it takes a few minutes to get your bearings, and that's consciousness coming back in. And this out breath and in breath that we experience every 24 hours, is just that's the normal going back and forth. But this also happens with every sense impression that we have and experience that we have. I mean, that's a little bit esoteric and out there, but I think one of those examples most people can resonate with.
I've often heard from several people that the belief system that as the bones of the skull are fusing and there's still malleable, or there's still, noticeable movement, the spirit hasn't fully solidified inside the body. And, as a, that it takes months, this idea that it takes months for the spirit to fully come into the baby, or at least that was a belief system. Tell us a bit more about anthroposophic. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, anthroposophic. Yep.
Tell this, although what you're describing is what my belief system. I believe that holistic medicine is this, um that there's a mental body, emotional body, a spiritual body, a physical body, an energetic body, and that we have to make sure that we nourish each one because they're all connected. You can't just only focus on healing the physical. I'm going to eat my vegetables and take my vitamins and go to an exercise class and think that that's health. There's so much more to health. And when we just take our vitamins and go to a spin class and eat vegetables and not focus on anything else, we're missing out on 90% of health. There's so much more out there. So what you're describing is my belief system, and yet I don't think I've ever really heard of this type of medicine you practice. Can you please, for those who haven't heard of it, explain what it is and how you came about discovering this?
Sure. So anthroposophic medicine is one of the fruits of anthroposophy. And anthroposophy is a body of work that was created by Rudolf Steiner in the late 19th, early 20th century, based on the works of Goethe and Paracelsus and some other naturalist type scientists. It's a way to know your environment by using your senses to experience it. And it's a way to know if the sense you're taking in is real or not. Okay, so this has to do with the physical. So when you take in food, is it natural or not? Your stomach knows, your intestines know. It's a way with light entering your eyes will know if it's real or not. If you're looking at a blue screen, your computer screen at night, your retina will not produce melatonin. You cannot fool your senses. So anthroposophy is a way to know your environment. It also has to do with your thought processes and your feelings. And it's a study that allows a person to be able to find a grounded center in reality. So this isn't, even though it's esoteric in terms of we're talking about these upper levels of human consciousness, it's actually a very grounded study of man. And it's all based in the physical here and now. There's an idea that there is no matter without spirit, and there's no spirit without matter. So there's always kind of this reciprocal pattern of everything that happens, everything that we experience physically, there's a spiritual gesture behind it. And so an example of that would be milk thistle. Milk thistle, we know, is used for cleansing the liver. It's used in a lot of tinctures for autistic children when they're going through chelation. And so when you look at the milk thistle plant, you're looking at a plant that looks very like it would hurt you. It's got these spines that come out. They're very pointy. They're very sharp. It has a beautiful purple flower in the middle of it. The rest of the plant looks very like it wakes you up to look at it. You notice it. You don't go walking through the woods without noticing thistle, especially if you rub up against it. So the spiritual gesture of the milk thistle plant is it gives a poke to the immune system to kind of wake it up, and it happens through the liver. So, we're looking at these kind of higher processes, and that type of gesture would be associated with a Mars gesture. When we're talking about planetary processes, which also has to do with that second level etheric life process, the Mars gesture is something that you give a nidus, you give a poke to something to wake the immune system up so that it can overcome whatever it's trying to deal with. And a very similar analogy to that would be with homeopathy. If somebody can't tolerate physical substance, we give them potentized substances, substances that are very dilute in water. And that's kind of a mini poke to the immune system that the body can handle and overcome and build up those will forces we were talking about. So if the body can build up those will forces to a homeopathic substance, then the thought is that the body can then react and overcome the physical substance that it's struggling against. So within anthroposophy, there are many fruits. So anthroposophic medicine is one, biodynamic farming is another, Waldorf education is another. We have therapeutic eurythmy, which is movement. We have therapeutic arts. We have therapeutic speech. There's all these different types of fruit that have come out of this. And within the study of anthroposophy, so now I practice the medicine aspect of it. And what it's about is it extends what I can learn in the physical world. So I got my advanced training in pediatric anesthesia. And so I use those physical concepts that I learn and extend that knowledge using these other ideas. And I ask, okay, I learned about the way this drug works with these receptors in the brain. Is it real? Is that child that I'm looking at in front of me, are they responding how they say this drug is supposed to respond? And if they're not, why aren't they? So I'm using anthroposophic thinking to look at actually what's happening in front of me and asking, is this real? And it is interesting in anesthesia because when I give a child an anesthetic to go to sleep and their higher consciousness lifts off, as they are transitioning to being completely unconscious, some things can get uncovered within the body. So you might see neural posturing of a child as they're going to sleep. You might see their breathing get stuck in their lungs. You might see they wet themselves. You might see seizure activity. And all of those things are what homeopaths call constitutional issues that they get uncovered when the higher consciousness gets lifted off. And it's really interesting. I've been so privileged to be able to see this. And I think without my anthroposophical way of seeing these children, I would not appreciate who that child is, beyond, they're a child that had asthma once at 8 months old, because you can still see that in their body, how they go to sleep and wake up. So I think that anthroposophy is just a way to know, kind of to broaden your experience of the world around you and really ask, is there truth to this? And even it can go so far as societal ideas, looking at the current political situation and people's response with fear and, where is the heart center of the country? And, it just really gives a person a depth of understanding that just wouldn't otherwise be present if you're looking at just the physical.
How do you perceive using anthropos
Ah,
anthroposophic medicine, or the philosophy of it? How do you perceive the political climate, or find the heart center, or gain the learnings so that you're not gonna allow yourself to get into fear mode?
yeah. So what I look at are areas that we can meet, areas that I can meet people wherever they're at in any situation. And when we're talking about the current political environment and this increase in fear, what I also see is we've had more grassroots movement since he's come into office than we had of any other president. We've had more local reaching out. And so, what I talk about in my community is how can we help each other? No matter what they say on Facebook or on YouTube or on the nightly news. If we go to the store, we're in our local grocery store, and you look at the cashier and you make eye contact with them and smile, that is what's real. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter what you're seeing on Facebook. And even then, Facebook can be used to bring people together and to give these real life situations of hope and um, overcoming the fear that we have and shared experience and the stories that are so important. I wasn't believed when I brought my son into the doctor with chronic, daily, foul smelling, explosive diarrhea, hand flapping, banging his head against the wall. And I was told this was normal over and over and over. I didn't fully believe that I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't trust my intuition until I heard other mothers' stories.
Mhm.
And so it's those individual stories. And I can tell you more than the anthroposophic medicine, more than anything else, I've learned more about healing from the mothers of the children that I treat than anybody else. And I think that's a pretty common story. And I'm sure you are in the same situation. You get to speak with all these amazing people, and that's where the healing comes in. It's in the story. Um, and so the story right now is the the fear that we feel about the racial discord, and that's one story. But the other story is, who is that person in your neighborhood, and how do you relate to them? And I think that's the more
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I love seeing the stories of people helping the homeless, and I always cry. I mean, that is just my biggest tearjerker, seeing like some 7-year-old who, you know, spent their entire summer making backpacks filled with, food and supplies for the homeless, or, that those kids that got together and built um little tiny homes, for the homeless. And it's just like, we need to, like you said, like, look that cashier in the eye and smile. We need to connect with the people that are in our community. There is no waiting for some organization to save our community. There is no waiting for a government. The government is never, ever, 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 ever going to solve homelessness or the hunger problem. So many kids, and I don't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but so many, you should Google it, look it up. So many kids go to school with no lunch, with no breakfast, because the parents can't afford it and the parents are both working, and they're hoping that their kid gets a cheese sandwich from the public school system. So many kids are going hungry, and there's so much child homelessness, and we can't just sit and wait. We have to go, what can I do to make a difference for my neighbor, for that person down the street? And it's like, that shifts from, I noticed in our conversation, what you're sharing is, you're sharing this shift from being from being at victim or a mode, or at effect, to being at cause, to being responsible for. Like earlier on, when you shared the children, you take both children, you say, what does it look like to share this ball? How can you share this ball? Or what does it look like to be ready for snack time? And allow that child to process that, and then come into that. That is taking that child from being at the effector, being in victim mode, being the victim of the authority, which is that parent or that adult or that teacher, to now being at cause in their life, being responsible for their life, and actually having a say, and then being responsible for their actions. And we need to also shift from being victim mode, victim of the political climate, to being at cause for how we can be that difference in our community. And if enough of us got together and just helped the people in our community, and reached out and connected, and brought love into it, we can make a giant change. And that's the roots movement I want to see. And so I love the work you're doing, because you're helping people see things differently, so that now they're no longer a victim, they're no longer in fear. Now they're in that possibility space of how they can expand their life purpose into helping and connecting with other people.
They're shattering that glass ceiling, without a doubt. Without a
Yeah.
doubt. It's we oftentimes talk about the government, the health system, the whatever. But I think what's really important is that we all have to realize this is what we created out of our common consciousness, right? We wanted cell phones. We wanted health care that was, you know, more accessible. We wanted uh, cheaper food. This is kind of what has come out of our collective consciousness. And, in a society that can take advantage of it, they will. But this is what when we see somebody when we see somebody that's dysfunctional, like with Donald Trump, when we see somebody that's really kind of got big issues, we look and we say, wow, look at him. And we're pushing him out of our circle. We actually make that disease process sicker because in order to heal, we have to defragment. We have to pull into our body what we want to warm up. So, when we think about cancer, cancer has escaped our life force, right? It has escaped that circle of connection and it's
Mm-hmm.
allowed to propagate. And if we do that with people in society, if we do that with race or gender or socioeconomic, if we push those people out of our circle and say that's their problem, or even the CDC and the FDA and the AMA and all these alphabet soup organizations, if we make them the enemy out there, then we are feeding them and not nourishing them within what we can do. And exactly like you say, if we can create the new, instead of fighting, if we can step out, to heal ourselves and our community, we need to drop out of this battle. You cannot fight a battle you don't show up for. So we need to bring all of this dysfunction within our ability, warm up the process, and in that create something new. I mean, that's the image that I hold on to every day. That's the meditations I do, even with when we're talking about vaccines and adjuvants and aluminum. What I hold on to is there's got to be a better way. I don't go to bed angry at the CDC every night. I go to bed thinking, you know, what's a new way this can be done? And I think about a new way that we can transition from where we're at now to where we want to be. But there's all these steps in the meantime. Maybe the first step is we create an adjuvant that's made out of sugar, like they're doing in Australia. Maybe with these little steps, we get from A to Z, but eventually we get to Z. But fighting where we're at, we're never going to get to where we need to be unless
Mm-hmm.
everything just blows up and, we just start over, which would not be optimal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's so clear what you're saying. For example, the anti-vaxxers and the pro-vaccine parents, the second one of them says peep, there's just this nuclear explosion, and now neither side is listening to the other side. And that's like you said, you're pushing the problem outside of you, and you're just creating this separation, and there's no ability to heal or to come together. Or like the children, what does it look like to share this ball? How can you share this ball together? Like, we should get all the parents together of the anti-vaxxers and the pro-vaccine and be like, what does it look like to come together and support the children in the best possible way we can?
Absolutely.
Because that's what we want. We want to support the children in the best possible way we can. What are some other ways for those who wonderful parents who are listening? What are some other ways that you just love teaching parents how to support their children?
So I think, the best way to support the child is for the mothers and fathers to support themselves. When we're looking at marriages where there's a one or more children with special needs, the divorce rate is 3 out of 4. All comers, it's about 50%. But when you throw a special needs child into that mix, the divorce rate goes up to 75%. And so I think one of the first things to encourage the health of the child is for the parents to look at themselves. What do they need? How can they warm up their environment? How can they defragment all of this chaos that's happening? What kind of a rhythm can whoever the stay-at-home parent is, if it's the mother, maybe the mom can set up, hey, Monday's rice day. Tuesday is enchiladas, Wednesday is soup. What can the parents do to kind of defragment everything that's happening so they can get a rhythm so that they have extra energy to deal with the meltdown of their child or the frequent doctor's appointments or the trying to figure out some creative way to pay the mortgage this month. So self-care of the parents is number one. Number two is then create a predictable rhythm for the child. Same bedtime every day, same meal times every day, a predictable rhythmic pattern so that the child doesn't go into stress. um, Providing appropriate boundaries for the child and not giving the child eight different options. you know where do you want to go today? The park, the swimming pool, the river, give the child, okay, Tuesdays we go to the library, Wednesdays we go to the river. Providing structure and form, and that is all part of that highest ego consciousness that we talk about in anthroposophic medicine, providing this place of rest that the child can just relax in. Because if the child's under fight or flight, stressing all the time, they can't grow. Our energy can only be used in so many different ways. And if the child isn't stressed, they can grow just like a plant, just like an animal. So, that's another, kind of a bigger concept that is very helpful. And to have grace and understand that, we make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. And one of the biggest things I see with autistic mothers, they come in and there's so much guilt. And I tell them, this is not your fault in any means. Because, first of all, you don't get autism in one generation. It takes 3 to 4 generations for autism to even present itself. The physical body has to get to such a state of denseness, and that doesn't happen in one generation. So it has occurred over several generations. And unfortunately, right now is when we've tipped the balance point where we can't detoxify, and it is showing up physically. But it was there. It was there 20 years ago. And when we first started seeing ADHD, it's been growing over this time. So to take that guilt out of the hands of the mother who she doesn't need that. It's not hers. She doesn't need to hold on to it. Um, those are probably the three biggest things that, when I first start with working with families, that really start a foundational piece that carries them. Because, working with these children, it's 1 to 2 years commonly. And so to start that foundation, to give them the gas up their engine so they can make it through the marathon, that's really important.
That's interesting that you said that it takes several generations to develop autism. Can you explain a bit more about that? I know that there's some people have a belief that it's genetic and it runs in the family. I have a cousin that married into the family, and they gave birth to two wonderful children, both very high on the spectrum and nonverbal, and they knew going into their marriage that autism ran in his family. And that was really my first experience with autism when I was a child, seeing this. And I grew up kind of just thinking, okay, it runs in the family, it's genetic. Some people have type 1 diabetes is in the family, and some, blue eyes runs in the family, or red hair, and autism is something that runs in the family. And now we're just seeing this huge jump. Now it's like, what is it? 1 in 60 children are somewhere on the spectrum, is what they're saying. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yeah. 1 in 28 boys.
And so is that because we have this overtoxic environment over the last, like you said, the few generations, and so it builds up in each mother and gets, like, all these toxins get passed down? Is it that we're not like our genes are not expressing, they're being suppressed by either GMO food or chemicals or both, or vaccines or all the above, and so then our body can't detox correctly? I mean, what is going on that it takes several generations? Or can you just explain this process a bit more so we can really fully understand, why do we have this sudden jump in autism? And is it just because we're better at diagnosing it? I mean, what is really going on?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that last question first because it's so common. That's commonly the answer that you get. Oh, we're better at diagnosing. But what I have personally been doing, anytime I meet a pediatrician or an early childhood teacher that's been practicing for 30 or more years, I ask them, 30 years ago, how many autistic children did you have in your class? And I've asked hundreds of these professionals now over the last few years, and they all say the same story. It did not exist like it exists now. I don't care what they call it or what they called it then. When I retired, it was a different class than when I started teaching. So, like I said, the stories are so important, and I think we need to keep those stories alive. I actually asked Joshua Coleman to start at that conversation because he's so talented with his videography skills. So, hopefully, he's starting that project to actually interview doctors and pediatricians and teachers with that very question. Secondly, I think you hit on a lot of those key points. And when we went from diseases of heat to diseases of neurologic dysfunction, when we took the heat out of the system. So, just to give you a start date, because we have to start somewhere, 1923, Sears Roebuck had a razor in their catalog, the first time ever for women, because it was the first catalog that had a sleeveless dress. Shortly after that, we saw synthetic clothing. We saw the use of ice boxes. We saw the use of antibiotics. We saw cry it out. We saw synthetic diapers. We saw Tylenol in 1959. We saw the introduction of vaccines, more broad spectrum antibiotics. We saw air conditioning. We see more preservatives in our food. So, all of these cooling gestures that have cooled our physiology. So they have turned on things like our methylation genes.
Mm-hmm.
So we have variants, sulfation genes, BHT. We've got all of these CBS. We've got all of these different genetic variations that are being expressed. They're not new, they're not mutations. They are variations that have always existed, but now they're turning on because of all of this cooling that we've done over the last 100 years.
So epigenetics.
Epigenetics, exactly. And it didn't happen in just one generation. We're only seeing it now because if you use the analogy of a bucket, we can keep filling that bucket with toxins. It's not going to overflow until the bucket's full. And our bucket just became full when autism exploded.
Mm. So this is the canary
In the coal mine. Yep.
disease or the syndrome or issue. And the fact that just with those techniques you were describing where you're asking the child to basically come outside themselves, like what does it look like to tie that shoe, um as having so much progress just shows that how even in the midst of all the toxins going on, we can overcome. We are so strong and so flexible and so able to heal. It's really miraculous. What now, do you believe that children should detox, or parents should like be more conscious of chemicals around the house, or do you believe in that, or is that one of the steps that you walk the parents through?
Yeah, I think that we should try to give our children things that are as close to nature as possible. Give them real food, real sensory input, real wood toys to play with instead of a plastic toy. I think we should give our children real sensory input. I think that's the first and foremost. As far as moving things out of the body, it's a balance with all health. We can't just let a child suffer. If we can do something to start the process moving, maybe that's, we start chelating or we start homeopathy or we start the craniosacral to bring to at least access some point of neutral, autonomic nervous system neutral, some point where the body says, this is health. And now I remember what that feels like. So that there's a way for the body to strive back towards that. You know, on the other hand, I don't think that constantly taking away the will forces of a child is going to benefit. So if a child lives on supplements and enzymes and a special diet and they have a um, uh, s- the equipment that they use in the classroom, this sensory modifying equipment that they have. So if we are giving the children everything to prop them up, it's like a tree that's growing with all this fruit on it, but you have to keep sticking these 2x4s under all the branches, you know, so that's how the tree has to live, instead of it living under its own will forces. I think that, what I recommend is yes, sometimes we need a nudge in these directions to start the healing process. So I'll start working with things so the body becomes more intelligent. We have a nice gut reset fever. The child has a nice developmental leap. And then we let the child go, and we work with holding the image of the child and having the child live into that image. And maybe they start to get backed up again. And so then we support them with homeopathy or craniosacral but we have this pulsing type activity,
Mm.
and it's really even common in the integrative medicine world that you don't take echinacea from September to March. You pulse it. You take it every 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, and it's the same idea. We don't want to live with crutches. We want to be able to run. And I don't think living on chronic supplements and enzymes and all of these medications is living. It's that's not health. So I think that we can access that, but it takes consciousness on the family and on the society and on the doctor, and really taking control of our own health. And again, I encourage the family, you know what's best for your child. I'm here to help you. I'm here to assist your path, but I can't take over the health of your child, because as soon as I walk away, your child's going to crash. You know,
Right.
you need to be the ego of your family. You need to be the fireplace. You need to be the warmth. You need to be the higher consciousness of your family. I am just here to support you in this process. So that's, how I see my role.
Beautifully said. A real doctor, the Latin word for doctor, it means teacher, right? Docere means teacher. And so
Hmm.
really, to be a true doctor, you have to be the teacher that your patients are actually students, and if they're students, then there's a point where they graduate and
Exactly.
no longer need you unless there's an acute concern, like how to be coached through a fever. In fact, I'd like to get into that a little bit, for those listeners, and of course I bet all the parents are just going to be banging down your door to want to learn more from you. I know I am. uh this concept of basically coaching your child through a fever, instead of suppressing it. There's so much fear around fever. Oh my gosh, my kids have a fever of 101, I'm gonna throw them in an ice bath and give them some Tylenol, what? Instead of saying, okay, that my kid has a fever of 101, I'm gonna put some hot packs on him, and three blankets, like, and give him some hot tea. So walk us through how to have a healthy fever. And is there a point where it's like too much, like at 104, 105? Is there a point where maybe we should be giving them Tylenol or putting them in ice bath, or what is your experience, and how can we coach parents to have healthy fevers?
So the first thing I say when a child gets the fever, I am always happy about that. This is great, because the alternative is you have a child that's simmering from November to May. And we don't want a child that's simmering. The child that has 99 once a week, runny nose all the time. They're never sick, but they're never really well. So when we finally have a child that has a good fever, I'm like, yes, this is something we can use as an opportunity. It's like the point in your life where you get a challenge, you overcome that challenge, and now you are stronger. So first of all, I see, the fever as an opportunity. Secondly, I teach the parents to have respect for the fever, because it can be a very destructive process if it's not managed correctly. So you don't let the child fever on the couch unobserved. You don't send the child to school when they're fevering. You have to stay close to the child and watch what's happening. If the child has a change of consciousness, so we like to see babies that are fussy. If I see a fussy hot baby, I'm happy. If I see a lethargic hot baby, I'm concerned. So we want to see activity. Um, We want to see that the baby is able to, or the child's able to take in fluids. They don't necessarily have to eat. In fact, I don't even encourage eating during a hot phase of the fever. So warm fluids and make sure that they're peeing. Um, we want to make sure that there should be a normal pattern of the fever. So the child should probably feel their best in the morning and start to peter out in the afternoon with a spike in the middle of the night. That's a normal progression and a resolution in the day. We see this a normal response when it's being managed right and not suppressed. This is going to last between 2 and 5 days. If a fever lasts beyond that, then I would say, we need some more advanced intervention. If the child's having problems breathing, if the child, like I said, has consciousness that seems like it's impaired, they just really seem out of it. If the mother ever feels concerned, she should always call her doctor. Even if the temperature thermometer says 99, if the mother says, you know what, something's not right, call the doctor.
So listen to your mother's intuition, don't second guess it.
Exactly, no matter
Mhm.
what the number says on the thermometer. In fact, I don't even encourage people to have thermometers because I think how the child looks is more important than the number, especially
Mhm.
when we're talking about children that are their physical bodies are more dense. They're going to be hot more on the external of their body anyway. And so what you're measuring is the fever dysfunction. It's not even in the right place. We see this commonly with people that are damaged with the MMR vaccine. The mother reports that the kid is super hot, but the heat is not in the gut. The heat is on the periphery. It's on their skin. In fact, we know after these children get the MMR vaccine and they do become injured, we know that there's measles autoantibodies in the brain and the gut, the cooler areas of the body. Because, of course, where is the virus going to run? It's going to run somewhere cooler. So, the idea that just watching your child symptomatically um, and see what uncovers. So when a person is sick, when you're sick, when an adult is sick, I always offer the parents this exercise too. The next time you get a fever, do a body scan. Look and see, where is their pain? Where is their quote unquote increased consciousness? Because when you have a fever, that is actually your higher consciousness coming deeper into the body to move something through. And you might discover pain in your right hip 10 years before your doctor discovers that there's some type of, dysfunction in that area or in your liver or in your spleen. So, really pay attention to that. And then when the parent becomes more aware of what a fever can do for them, they're going to be more curious as to what happens when their child gets a fever. And I think that's another important thing is to remain curious. What is this? Why is this happening? Make notes. I encourage mothers to document, write down all of these things. So there's a nice, good story. When they call and tell me, okay, they had, they first started, you know, increased fighting with their sibling, and then they didn't eat dinner, and then 2 in the morning they had this fever. Of course, you're not going to start documenting until the fever hits, but you can go back a couple hours and be like, okay, what led up to this? And then the next time they get sick, oh, I've seen this pattern. And the mother can then anticipate, okay, this is what's going to happen. So, it requires increased presence and consciousness of the parent, which is hard in society because we are all so busy and we're just barely making it month to month. But I think the investment is worth it.
So you were saying the example you gave was that the kids were fighting like at dinner and there was a certain behavior. You're not saying that the fighting caused the fever. You're saying that the kid was maybe irritable
Yep.
because the fever was about to happen.
Yep.
And so if you are observant of your children, you can begin to sort of see, okay, what's about to happen. Like I'm seeing when my kid has these like fits, the little toddler fits, almost always it's either because he ate something he's sensitive to once in a blue moon, or it's right before has a big bowel movement.
Yep.
And we just notice
Exactly.
he's like he goes from like super sweet, super calm to like just screaming and flailing and not like screaming, but just kind of like, "Where's my fire truck?" or whatever. And it's just like, "Whoa, what's going on? Like, what just happened?" That's kind of odd behavior. And then right afterwards, we realized, oh, it was because he was having a bowel movement. And so now anytime he has sort of this fit, that's like the, okay, you're about to, there's like it's gonna be that's gonna
A
happen.
mass
So
exodus.
yeah, we need to run to the potty. So yeah, we're starting to see these fun, behaviors. And I think a lot of parents who aren't aware would just start yelling at their kids, like, or would kind of try to punish or discipline their kids when the toddler didn't know how to tell you, my bowels are moving and it's uncomfortable and something's happening down there. There was no language for them, so they just started getting frustrated and fussy and acting out. And then that's, parents who aren't aware might just be trying to discipline them, and that's sort of pushing them inward, or like less connected with their body, because now instead of helping them explore and understand what's going on, they're just being punished for something that was natural, right?
Yep. I think all behavior is mediated by something. There's always a reason. I like Gabor Mate's work and Gordon Neufeld's work on nonviolent communication and
Mhm.
looking at all the neurobiology. They say time and time again that there's a reason for the behavior. It doesn't mean that you have to accept bad behavior at all. In fact, accepting bad behavior is going to lead to more, you know, behavior to get stuck in the physical body. But
Mhm.
I think it can be really beneficial to look at that behavior and be curious. What's causing that? And number one, it makes the parent less reactive. And number two, maybe you find a reason for it. I
Mhm.
just had a mother that found that her child had increased behavior. She tested the wall of her house and there was major EMF leak. So she moved the bed to the middle of the room and the child's behavior changed overnight. So, it's always there's always a reason. There's an unmet need that they're trying to get their needs met, but they don't quite have their frontal lobe function to say, I need to have a bowel movement. They're just trying to get their
Exactly.
needs met.
Yes, exactly. I noticed this in my son, you know, he was still a toddler but much younger, had less language. And he'd do stuff once in a while where he would just start like dumping everyone's glass out, or asking for a glass of water and then dumping it out, or throwing his toys in it, or at the dinner table, grabbing someone's glass and then putting food in it and making soup. And my husband, out of frustration, wanted to try to start to discipline, and we were kind of like, well, how do we stop this behavior? And I said, you know what? It just hit me, this intuition. This is a symptom of something. What is he missing? And I was like, oh, water play. We don't let him. I mean, we take a bath and stuff, but he doesn't really get to sit with clothing on and, like, do the Montessori, like, pour one water from one cup to another. So I set him up with some toys in the bath, like, just with water, and just, not sitting in a bath, not a full bath, but just like, here's a bucket full of water, here's some cups, and he just started pouring it back and forth, and that behavior went away. He could, once I introduced water play, and several times a week, he can be near everyone else's glass of water, and he won't pour it out. He won't put food in it. He won't put his toy in it. But if he doesn't get enough water play, all of a sudden he's doing that. And so it was like, wow, that's a symptom of something. He was missing that. And
I
so
love that.
yeah, isn't that neat? And it's funny because this is I think holistic, understanding more about holistic medicine helps me see this, because like naturopaths on the show keep saying, the body speaks to us in symptoms,
Hmm.
and we need to listen and address it while it's still a whisper, and if we
Yep.
don't, then it's going to manifest in something pretty nasty. And so what you're saying is to have that observation and become the detective and look for what's missing, so that we can help that child, because that behavior is coming from somewhere. And it's our first reaction shouldn't be, well, kids like to act out and we need to smack them down to make them, straighten up and fly right. Are there some ways, speaking of warming the environment, are there some ways that you could coach us to warm the environment, especially while we're trying to raise wonderful children and discipline them?
Yeah, I would say I really like the work of John, good Lord, Kim John Payne. He talks about simplicity parenting, and his premise is, make the choices fewer, simplify the environment. Children don't need 1,000 toys. They need a few high quality things that they can work with, that are tools that are going to help them learn. Are they things that are going to be multi useful? Um, and keeping that predictable rhythm too is going to help the child succeed. So their coat is always in the same place, their shoes are always in the same place. It's going to help them succeed. And if they can meet the challenges every day and succeed at them, their behavior is going to be better. And then when we do see behavior that comes out of that, we're going to say, okay, there's something else happening here. But, you know, one of the other things I talk about too is when you start to see increased behavior in a child, feel their hands. If their hands are cold, there's something backing up in their system. Think about, what did they eat 2 hours ago? What did they take in sensory wise 2 hours ago? Maybe, media, or, somebody disciplined them in a harsh way, or they ate something that just doesn't agree with them. Maybe corn's a common trigger. Um, so, just being aware of those behaviors and the physical characteristic. You can look at the child's eyes. You can look at their pupils. If a child is starting to get stressed, their pupils will dilate acutely. And that's an acute form of something is stressing this child's body. Now, when we see chronic pupil dilation, we think of adrenal issues, something a deeper problem. But working with children, say you see a child and they are trying to do something and they're getting frustrated, and then maybe the parent gets frustrated because the child's acting out, and the parent says something to the child, and all of a sudden the child's eyes get big, their pupils get big. That is an opportunity to reach deep into that child. At that time, if you offer love and support and get close to that child in a warm gesture, it's going to go deeper into that child than any other time. When their pupils are wide like that, their sensory nervous system is open and accessible. So, just these little things, when we're working with children, and these things are all accessible to everybody. I don't have any special knowledge. This has all come from observing children day in and day out, being curious about them. And I would love to hear, if people want to reach out to me and tell me their experiences, what works for their child, and um, things that they've seen work. I would love to hear these stories, similar stories, behavioral support, and I would just love to hear. I think stories are fascinating. Stories of recovery, stories of triumph over something that they thought was difficult. Please email me, drdebragambrell.com, Dr. Debra at drdebragambrell.com. I love to hear success stories.
Thank you. We'll make sure that your email is in the show notes of today's podcast along with your website. Now you have, and this was kind of this funny thing that we both laughed about before we started recording, is that my podcast is called Learn True Health, and your clinic is called True Health Medicine in Santa Rosa, California. And I just that didn't, and although you spelled true TRU, is there a reason why you do that, or how did you come up with the name of your clinic?
You know what? It's funny. It's actually not my clinic. It's my friend's clinic, and it's Justin Hoffman and his wife Kimberly. They opened up this clinic, and so they came up with the name, and it's a naturopathic clinic. So it's all, and I am the only osteopath. So they graciously allowed me to practice in their presence, and I'm really enjoying working there. Um, it's an amazing facility, and we're all very like-minded, holistic. So I don't really know where they came up with the name of it, but I'm glad that there was a commonality.
It'll be easier for my listeners to remember.
Yep.
True Health Medicine in Santa Rosa, California. So you practice at that clinic, and where else can people connect with you? You know, we have wonderful listeners around the world. Do you work with people like through Skype? Can you do telemedicine? What does it look like to be a patient or a client of yours?
Yeah, so I do offer consults through Skype. I offer a couple different kinds of consults. So I can offer general advice as far as if it's a new mother that is working with a developmental issue of her child, whether it's autism or sensory issues or the like. And also, I offer anthroposophic evaluations. And so, what this looks like commonly is a child that is in kindergarten or pre kindergarten, and they're trying to figure out, is my child to go ready to go on to the next grade? So there's an in-depth evaluation and questioning that goes with that that can really help the parent decide if their child is ready to move on. Because if a child is not fully in their body and we start teaching academics to them, it can actually get into a chronic pattern, a chronic lifelong pattern that is really hard to overcome. Things like dyslexia and comprehension difficulties and math difficulties. So, doing these assessments and then recommendations of as how to get this child ready then to move on is something that I do via Skype. So anyone in the world I can consult with on that. And Yeah, and then of course locally, I speak around the country too, different topics, health related topics. Facebook is a really good medium. I love to interact with people on Facebook, on my Dr. Debra Gambrell site on Facebook. I love hearing stories. I love that personal connection. Um, yeah, and then of course through True Health Medicine.
You mentioned that when the person isn't fully integrated into their body, that and then you try to like force them to learn academics, that dyslexia or math problems can be lifelong. Can you go into that a little bit and explain? You know, I've had that experience of very light dyslexia, um, and I've seen it in my. I have a few friends I grew up with that had it, and so I'd like to understand. I'm sure my listeners would as well. What do you mean by like if you're not fully in your body and then you start teaching academics? Like, what does that mean?
So between the ages of 0 to 7, that's when we have a great deal of physical growth in the body. And we see that. Our children that are wearing certain clothes, they don't fit 4 months later. They're just growing astronomically.
Mm-hmm.
And in that growth is neuroendocrine growth as well. So the myelin sheaths are developing. We're getting increased sensory perception out to our fingers and our toes. We're also getting the image of where our body stops and where somebody else's body begins. We're getting the internal understanding of a three-dimensional image. So we're able to move in space, forward, backwards, up and down, left and right, and know where we're at. We have that's proprioception. We have a vestibular sense that's developing. So all of these senses are developing. Now, specifically when we're talking about proprioception and three-dimensional creation of images, that happens in our right prefrontal lobe. When we learn to read, if we don't have that space created, the three-dimensional space created in our right prefrontal lobe, when we read the word fox, for example, the word FOX, if we're not in our bodies, looks like the letters FOX in our right prefrontal lobe. Now, if we're in our bodies, three-dimensional proprioception is intact. When we read the word fox, it enters our left prefrontal lobe phonetically, and in our right prefrontal lobe pops up an image of the fox. And you can imagine what that means for reading comprehension as life goes on. So if we are a sight reader, we have not come into our body before academics begin. We will be reading words that pop into our right prefrontal lobe, and we have to take those words and then construct images, and that is taxing. Those are people that say, I can't do word problems. I can't understand what this paragraph says. So it's so important to get children fully into their body so that as they're reading words, a movie presents in their right prefrontal lobe. Reading comprehension goes up.
This is fascinating because my son learned the alphabet back and backwards, forwards, any letter by the time he was 18 months old. And I was like, oh, well, he's got it. So let's start teaching him reading. He's going to be 2.5 next month. And I'm like, I am determined to help him learn to read by then. And now it's like, well, wait a second, maybe I'm doing him a disservice. Are you saying that we should hold children back until we see these signs that they've developed appropriately, so that when they do learn math or they do learn reading, that it is optimal, their brain is optimally creating these patterns in a way that is the best way for them to process this information?
Yes, I do believe that's true. Um, so what I would focus on is resolving any retained reflexes that children have. So when they're trying to balance on one foot, a 3-year-old should be able to balance on one foot for 3 seconds and say a simple nursery rhyme or repeat something like, you know, monkeys like mangoes or something. If they can do that and not have a compensatory response, so maybe their left arm doesn't go flailing up or their tongue doesn't stick out of their mouth like the Michael Jordan thing. If if we can get child fully into their bodies into thoughtless, thought-free movement and compensatory free movement, that is the goal that we want to get before we start reading for comprehension. I mean, it's not horrible to teach letters and, all of that. I mean, that's all fine and good. But as far as reading comprehension, you're going to be much more benefited if there is actual physical space in the right prefrontal lobe. It's just not there at 2.5 years old.
So
It's
how can we nourish that? Should all kids do gymnastics class, or what kind of activities should we encourage our kids to do?
so being outside, walking on rocks, climbing trees, using monkey bars, walking on balance beams, jump rope, all of these unstructured activities, because if you go to a gymnastics class, they're going to be doing it for you. They're going to be
Mm.
taking your body and making you do a somersault, right? And there's no will force. So
Mm.
having the child out in nature, they will do what they need to do. They will
Mm-hmm.
do whatever they need to do to get their needs met to bring their consciousness into their body in the way that it needs to happen. Children are incredibly smart. From 0 to 7, they're getting into their body. They know this. And teachers will tell you that I can't keep Johnny in his seat. They're in preschool. I can't. Well, no, because Johnny needs to be up moving,
Mm-hmm.
and if you try to suppress this, guess what? Johnny's going to get in trouble because he needs to move. And yeah.
And so for kids who are on the spectrum or are displaying not neurotypical behavior, what do you recommend that parents have them? Do you have them do the same thing? Like let them just go play in a park, go walk on rocks, go climb trees, or what can the parents do to help support the child in their physical development?
So yeah, I would definitely encourage that the parents get these kids out to nature. And also, we know that autistic kids have an 8 times higher risk of drowning. Okay, when you talked about this lack of water play that your child was missing,
Mm-hmm.
autistic kids, one of the big things that they need is that their water, their etheric, that second level that we talk about in anthroposophic medicine, has to do with liver functioning, and that's the water element. So, we know methylation, sulfation. We know 95% of autistic kids have issues with methylating. So this is the water element that they're looking for healing. And we also know that autistic kids have 8 times the risk of drowning. So, water play is really helpful and healing for autistic kids. So swimming, playing in creeks, things like that, but be vigilant. Stay close to your child. If there's a pool around that your child can have access to, make sure there's alarms on it, gates on it, all the 9 yards, more than the typical child, the neurotypical child.
Mm.
Um, but there are certain sensory activities, sensory integration activities that they can do that will help, bring themselves into their body. Log rolls and even going out for a morning walk every morning. When a child is out first thing in the morning in the sun, we talked about regulating the mitochondrial and the circadian and the liver and the adrenal rhythms. But what it also does is after about 15 minutes of walking, without having conversation, but just out walking, meditative walking is what it's called, but just out just for a walk. The child, after about 15 minutes, all of their rhythms start to synchronize. So their heart starts to synchronize with their muscle, with their joint movement, with their proprioception, with their thoughts. Everything starts to come together. In fact, at the Mulberry School we talked about in Santa Rosa, the first thing they do every morning is go out for a walk. They get the kids in their body. It's the number one way to get their kids in the body. It's free, it's time efficient. So every morning, every single day, rain or shine, they're out there walking with the kids. Then they come in and do some educational pieces. And it actually gets into their deeper into their experience versus just sitting a kid at their desk when they first come in.
I love it.
Yep.
That's
And
amazing.
Robin Brown goes around the country and speaks to traditional mainstream public schools, Waldorf schools, Montessori schools, and she talks about the importance of this movement. If when the teachers just do that, when they just have the kids move in the morning, they see improvements in their classroom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just like when kids spin around, they're craving, their neurology is craving that sensation of spinning, right?
Yes.
Yeah, versus like or the rocking. So the kids that are rocking should they be encouraged to be on a swing set, like swinging?
Counterintuitively, when children are spinning or rocking, like an autistic child, that is where they feel themselves. So that's where they feel still. So, in order to train their proprioceptive capabilities, the thing for those children, in the overactive kids, the thing that those children need is how to feel comfortable in rest. So, we do a lot of balance beam work with children. So, they walk on a
Mm.
balance beam, but the heel to toe. So, they'll do step, 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 that rate with their arms out to their side. And when they can do it, their eyes closed. And then they do it backwards. So they're learning balance and stillness because they don't have that.
That is so that's very interesting. I love how you've taken so much education from so many different areas and brought it together. You really do have a gift through observation. I can really see that through observation of all these children, and then you've put on your detective hat, and you can really see where that child needs support, and you look energetically, holistically, spiritually, emotionally, neurologically. You're looking at all these different areas, and I just love the work you're doing. I'm one of your fans for sure.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been such a pleasure. You are welcome back anytime. I know we could just keep talking for hours about this. Is so fascinating. I'm sure my listeners would love it. Please, listeners, go check out the links in the show notes of today's podcast, drdebragambrell.com, and also her Facebook. The links to that will also be in the show notes, so you can interact and continue learning. And of course, with your website, you've got these services, sublingual immunotherapy, the I'm gonna say it, anthros anthroposophic.
That's close,
Okay.
girl. That's close.
I gotta tell you, I was in a special ed, and so to be on air saying things wrong, I'm like, I've come a long way. I've let go of a lot of limiting decisions and limiting beliefs that I created through the education system. But anthroposophic.
Anthroposophic. Yep.
Yes.
You
Okay. So
got it.
you've got that as your services, and I can see that you have anesthesia and vaccine safety on your website as well, and so much great information. So definitely, listeners, check it out. Now, not all my listeners have children, or at least school age children, but everyone has a friend or family member with children. So please, if you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it, please, you probably already thought of some people you want to share it with. I'd love for you to share this information, and let's get Dr. Debra's information out there so we can help as many children as possible. I know a part of me, part of my inner child feels healed today or vindicated.
Yeah, that's great.
Having learned so much of this and looked back, I've reflected as I listened to you on my childhood and realized, you know what? It's not that something was wrong or broken in me. I was just experiencing this or that, or this is really what I needed. And so it's interesting that even those who don't have kids could look back at their own childhood and see and just acknowledge themselves and what they went through. And now that we have all this information, and I love that you take the guilt away from mothers who, of course, our first instincts always blame ourselves. But you take that away from them and you go, okay, because guilt's not going to empower us to make healthy changes. But what is important is that mothers know that they're doing the best they can, and now you're going to increase their tool belt
Hmm.
so they can make more healthy choices for them and their family. Thank you so much for the work you do, and I'm just so impressed. And I hope that our listeners check you out and follow you, and continue to learn from you. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show today.
Likewise, thank you so much, Ashley. You are a very gracious host. Thank you so much.
Enjoy what you heard today on your episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Did something move you, inspire you? Did you get great information that's going to change your life? Awesome. That's exactly what I'm here to do, is to help you gain your health back. Please turn around and share this. If this is something that's helped you in any way, share this with those you love. Love the Learn True Health podcast and want to support us? Awesome. You can go to takeyoursupplements.com and you can support us that way. You'll get access to amazing supplements that are just really great quality for a great price. And there'll be someone on the other end of the line to help you pick out your supplements that are right for you. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Or join our membership, learntruehealth.com/join. That's another great way to support our podcast, support our movement, and you'll be supporting yourself. Gain more information, wonderful videos, wonderful trainings, and you'll also be able to share those with those you love as well. So go to learntruehealth.com/join. Want something fun for free? Go to learntruehealth.com, and right there on the front page, you'll see where you can get our free cookbook. I spent a lot of time making it, and it was so much fun. It's really delicious, healthy recipes. And you can also get our 7-day doctor course. Right there, it's 7 days of naturopathic videos sent right to your inbox, and you can learn from top naturopaths on how to gain health naturally. So that's takeyoursupplements.com for wonderful supplements. learntruehealth.com/join to join our awesome membership, which is only open for a limited time. You can get our free healthy cookbook, and you can also get for free 7 days of wonderful naturopathic videos sent to you. Just go to learntruehealth.com and you'll see it right there on the front page. Thank you so much for being a listener, and thank you for sharing and helping others. Let's spread this information and turn this ripple into a tidal wave.